didn't have the audio on this whole time. I didn't have the microphone on. Can you guys hear me now? My goodness, I'm having a day, you guys. I am having a day. Is that better? Okay, like, I'm sorry. I'm having quite the day here. So there's a couple of things we're going to talk about, which if you saw the live stream event I had set up to live stream to, then you know what we're going to be talking about. I'm still learning this streaming software, and for whatever reason, it wasn't accepting the information I was giving it to have all of the information I wanted appear on the live stream on YouTube. So I'll have to figure that out. I don't know what I was doing wrong. I'm sure it's an easy fix. I'm just still learning the software. But that is why it just says Brook TV live stream or Brook TV is live or something like that instead of the name I had set up. So I'm going to really quick see if I can edit that while we're live so that I can have it show up how I wanted. But let me try. So I'm going to just copy paste everything over and see if that works. See if it saves it and it'll show up for you guys. I can't guarantee everything will work, but we'll try. Woo-hoo. Okay. Once I finish copying it, if it'll let me. There we go. Okay, so how are you guys? I'm going to give a little week 7 update first. Okay, tell me if you guys see the name change, because I just did it. See if it shows up correctly now. We're going to give a little week 7 update. Yes, it is working. Okay, we're going to give a little week 7 update for quarantine because I have the week 8 video ready for tomorrow, but I did not end up vlogging like at all week 7. So I'm going to give a little explanation as to why. And then we're going to talk about another true crime case because that just sounded fun. So week 7, right? At this point, all of the days are blurring together. All of the weeks are blurring together. Everything is just blurring together. And I fought through something. Like, I wasn't feeling good. My stomach was just really unhappy. And, yeah, I just wasn't feeling good that week. So that was most of the reason. We had some busyness in the beginning of the week. Like, we had a lot we were doing. So, of course, during that, I was like, oh, I'll just focus and I'll vlog the second half of the week. That's fine. And then I got sick and I wasn't feeling good. And I'm like, oh, gosh, okay. So, I didn't end up vlogging. The way this whole time period has kind of gone for me has been kind of a roller coaster. I started out this whole time period with very high hopes for being productive, very lofty goals for what I wanted to accomplish, what felt reasonable for what I could try to get done. And there was just a lot that I wanted to do. And I mean, in the beginning, I really was very productive, actually. I knocked out a ton of stuff that first, I would say, week. I was fairly productive. This, probably through the second or third week, I was fairly productive. And that felt really good. And it waned. it ended up going away. So I did not continue that like I wanted to. And then it was just kind of up and down. One day I'd feel super productive. The next day it would be really hard to get motivated. And there was kind of a really hard balance to find between feeling like I should still be getting stuff done and not just sitting there, but also like kind of mentally feeling a lot and like I needed to let myself breathe. So that's how quarantine's been for me. Not bad, just it's been kind of up and down. I went through phases of being super productive, being super focused, to not at all, to trying to find a balance. It's a game we're playing. But that is why I didn't end up vlogging week 7. So you will not see a vlog for week 7. This is the week 7 update. And we're going to have week 8, which is the week that I bought the baby chicks, going live tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. I have the whole vlog of getting things set up for them, going to get them, introducing them to Max. Yeah, it's really fun. So that will go live tomorrow. And yeah. Okay. So now on to the true crime case for today. And that is the Hae Min Lee case. You probably have also heard it called the Adnan Syed case. If you listened to podcasts several years ago, you would have seen the podcast talk about it. It's called Serial. The very first season of Serial is just this case. And it's looking at it from an outside perspective. And she's coming in and looking at what hard evidence is there actually, what are the really well-known facts, and what is the likelihood that Adnan Syed is innocent like he's claiming. So before I get too much further into discussing those details, I wanted to talk about the facts of the case. And I brought up a website that I will, I don't know if I want to use that one. It does do a pretty good job of summarizing it, but I'll try to put a link to the website that I want to look at. And my computer is doing weird things. Is anybody else like just feeling a little frazzled? Okay, so I'm back at Wikipedia. Like I said last time, Wikipedia can be edited, and there are going to be things you gotta discern through on Wikipedia. As much as Wikipedia is talked about in a very positive light, which I don't think there's a problem with, it is an editable website by anybody, right? So anybody can put information up there. So you have to be careful with Wikipedia still. I want to say it's gotten better, but just with anything online, make sure you're checking your sources, making sure they're reliable and that you at least know how they work. So like Wikipedia, I'm looking at because I think it'll give a good summary of the case and everything, but you really want to discern, okay, how much can I trust this and how much do I need to be like cautious as I'm reading through it, and just make sure. So I said all of that last time too, but I'm putting in the chat the Wikipedia link if you want to go to it and look along with me. So I will also put the podcast. They do a very, very good job on the podcast. It's Sarah Koenig, I think is how you say her last name. About Serial. Yeah, Sarah Koenig. I couldn't remember if that was how you said her last name or not. She hosts the first, I think she hosts all of the seasons of Serial. She's the host. So she's the one that's doing all of the interviewing, all of the investigating. Yeah. So, to summarize the case, actually, the Serial website, I'm looking at the season 1 thing, actually does a pretty good job of summarizing at least what happened. Okay, so on the Serial website, before we hop into Wikipedia, a high school senior named Hae Min Lee disappeared one day after school in 1999 in Baltimore County, Maryland. A month later, her body was found in a city park. She'd been strangled. Her 17-year-old ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed, was arrested for the crime, and within a year, he was sentenced to life in prison. The case against him was largely based on the story of one witness, Adnan's friend Jay, who testified that he helped Adnan bury Hae's body. But Adnan has always maintained he had nothing to do with Hae's death. Some people believe he's telling the truth, many others don't. And then it talks about she goes through documents, trial testimony, and police interrogation, and all of that. She does a lot of good job. Well, a really good job looking at the actual evidence and records that there are for that case. So you can hear the trial testimony, you can hear all of those types of things. And okay, so now let's look at Wikipedia. So Wikipedia. Hae Min Lee, a Korean-American high school student, was last seen alive on January 13th, 1999 in Baltimore County, Maryland. Her body was found 4 weeks later in Leakin Park. She had been killed by manual strangulation. Lee's ex-boyfriend, Adnan Masood Syed, was convicted of first-degree murder, largely on testimony of an acquaintance and mobile phone records, which is an important part. He was sentenced to life plus 30 years. Okay. Yeah. So, I want to look at some of the main evidence. The main evidence that they have. It's important to have context for the evidence that you're seeing. And I feel like that's something with this case that's really doable to not necessarily land on a definitive answer because of having that context, but it puts you in a position of you really have to pay attention to what is going on, and it can change your approach to looking at the evidence. So there's a few different pieces of evidence I really want to talk about, and ones that make me go, huh? Okay. that are very interesting. So I'm going to look at comments really quick. Yeah, this happened very close to our community where he is from. Oh, wow. I walked in the same park that you were talking about. Oh, wow. So you must hear about this case a lot. I mean, you must have heard about this case a lot even before the podcast went huge, and then it just became everybody was talking about this case. Because that's really what started this whole conversation about the murder of Hae Min Lee and the trial of Adnan Syed was the Serial podcast. I remember listening to it when it came out. I was only, I want to say 2 or 3 episodes behind, I think. I wasn't that far behind when it was going live, the episodes, and I was driving back and forth all the time, so I would listen to it in the car on the way, and gosh, it was just huge. So, yeah. That would be really interesting. I feel like it can be such a surreal experience when it's something that's happened in the area you live in or in, really close proximity. I have that with certain cases that only a couple of them are really that big. I mean, being in the Bay Area, the biggest is the Zodiac, right? That's like the top. But it's so surreal because when you hear details talked about for it, you're like, oh my gosh, I've been there. I just drove past there the other day. Like, it gets crazy. That's a very surreal experience. But anyways, okay, that's very, very that's very, very intriguing, interesting. That this happened in your area. That's cool to know. Okay. So the 3 main things I want to talk about. One is the whole phone records thing. So there's a whole long part of the podcast that's dedicated to this that really goes into it. The basis of the evidence they have against Adnan is phone records pinging towers in the area that corroborate with Jay and his story. The way they come across Adnan as a suspect is because of Jay. Because Jay says, I did this with him, I helped him bury I murdered her with him, but I helped him bury the body. He came to me and said, I mean, he curses, I won't curse, but he said, basically, I killed her, come pick me up, and they bury the body, is the gist of it. And let me get my dates straight on when that part of it happened, because it was not immediately. It was, oh gosh. Let me see. Timeline. So there's a whole timeline on the Serial website. The Serial website has amazing resources on all of this. Okay. So yeah. Jay's first interview. What day is his first interview? It doesn't say when he was interviewed. Okay. So I wish it said. Darn. Okay. She disappeared on January 13th. That was the last time she was seen alive. On Oh, Wikipedia does have some info. Now I'm going like back and forth between the pages. So on February 12th, the Homicide Division received an anonymous phone call suggesting that they should focus their investigation on Lee's ex-boyfriend and classmate Adnan Syed. So I think they brought him in, I want to say the 13th or something. Needless to say, it was weeks later. It was not immediately, nowhere close to immediately. It was something like a month-ish later. So in his first interview, he gives a timeline of what happened. And it basically goes through, he gets a call from Adnan. He then, Adnan arrives at his house. They go to the mall. And then Jay drops Adnan off at school for practice. And then goes and hangs out at a friend's house until he's supposed to get a call from Adnan saying to come pick him up. And then when he gets the call to come pick him up, that's when Adnan says that he killed Hay and her body is in the trunk. And he says and confesses to helping hide the body, helping bury the body. Then, in the second interview he gives, they ask him questions. And they basically kind of pick apart different parts of it, but the timeline he gives shifts. He changes some details, like he goes from in the first interview saying, meet me at a strip off of Edmondson Avenue, to come get me, I'm at Best Buy. And he's specifically saying he's at Best Buy. And then the whole thing happens where he still sees Hay's body in the trunk and helps him bury her. The consistent part after that is they do say the same place where they ditched her car, which is where the car ended up being found. And he knew that. He knew where it was. There's a couple more phone calls they make, which are interesting. Yeah. So, the whole phone calls thing is important just because it's corroborating the story of Jay, right? So Jay comes in, says, Adnan did this. I helped him bury her. This is where you'll find the car. They had already found her body at that point, and so they knew that part of it. They got where her car was and to look at Adnan, and then they compare these timelines that he's giving, which do shift, to the phone records. So they pull the phone records and say what towers were pinging at what time and who could have been there. You know, like, does that line up with the timelines he's giving? And the problem with the phone records, and I'm going to bring those up. If you're looking at the Serial website, it's amazing. All of the different documents and all of that. There's a huge discussion about whether the phone records are reliable for location or not. Now, keep in mind, this was all happening in 1999, not now, not with technology we have now, not not with all of the advances we've had since then. And that's when it becomes a very different story, right? You didn't have GPS on phones back then. You had towers that were pinged for cell phone service from a cell phone, and that is how you knew where it was. But the debate about whether that's reliable is really interesting because it's almost accepted that if a phone pings a tower, it has to be a reliable location because the cell phone has to be within the right location to ping that, right? It seems obvious. It seems like a no-brainer. But if you look on the Serial website, it shows the AT&T fax cover sheet. And it says the cover sheet AT&T included with Adnan's cell phone records that they pulled had a disclaimer on it, which said any incoming calls will not be reliable information for location. So even the cell phone company was saying this cannot be counted on to tell exactly where somebody was. So if you can't look at location, then you have to start looking at, do phone calls made and timing of phone calls made line up with that timeline then, if the location can't be counted on, right? So even if the cell phone pings a tower that's near Leakin Park, and that should tell you, hey, it pinged this tower at this time, he must have been there, and that lines up with Jay saying, oh, we buried her body at this time, then that works, right? Not necessarily now. You want to be careful about trusting that. So then you look at the timeline of phone calls of when it's made. And what the podcast eventually narrows it down to what's important in the phone calls is there's one phone call that is weird for his reasoning for his cell phone calling at that point, because there's a time frame, I think while he's at track practice, where he doesn't have, no, not while he's at track practice, after. There's some time frame where he doesn't have his cell phone. Jay does, is his excuse. And he gives the explanation of, Jay had my phone during that time, so any phone calls made would have been him making them, not me. And having that whole conversation. So there's one that sticks out as weird if it's not Jay, and it's a friend that Jay doesn't know, that Jay has never met or talked to, that Jay would not call from his cell phone. You don't just call a number you don't know in somebody else's cell phone. And there's an argument of, if they call in, oh, maybe it was an accidental butt dial. Okay, that was a really weird time length for an accidental dial. And then it's, if it's voicemail, is that shown on the phone records? If, it goes to voicemail, like if she called in and it went to voicemail, does that, like, what happens with that? Does that show on records? Da-da-da-da. And then you look at, does that person remember talking to him on that day? And how reliable this far after can it be to really know, yes, that phone call with him happened on that day that I'm remembering? The phone records are probably the biggest piece, next to Jay's testimony because they're corroborating each other, but they also kind of pick each other apart because there's a lot of things in each that call out stuff in the other. You know, there's a lot of Jay changing his story is like the biggest aspect of that side of the case. It's like, which one is it? You know, like, was it a strip mall or was it Best Buy? And when did you end up telling this person? Because he eventually testifies that he told somebody. When did you tell them? And those little things change. And, you know, no, you don't expect somebody to have it perfect because, of course, they're not going to be rehearsing it, right? But also, why do those kind of details change? You wouldn't expect those kind of details to change. If it was Best Buy, you would have said it was Best Buy from the beginning. So that's weird. I'm not going to claim that I know one way or the other in this video, by the way. If you're waiting for that. I'm not going to claim anything on that. But I just want to point out it's weird. So there's a whole lot of things that go back and forth in this case that make it a very intriguing one to decide if he's guilty or not, or if there's reasonable doubt or not. It's just interesting. So, okay, looking at the comments. A lot of people in the community think he is innocent, and a lot of people think he is guilty. In that park, that is where a lot of bodies are dumped. Yeah. I feel like anybody that hears this case kind of goes back and forth because you can ping pong between, okay, there are elements of Jay's story that line up with phone records, but then how reliable are phone records? Why would Jay make that call or talk to that friend that he doesn't know? And why is Adnan not directly defending himself more? Because there's quite a few things that Sarah Koenig asks him in talking with him over the phone that he doesn't give an answer for, and he's like, I can't explain that. Like, he can't explain the phone call with the friend that Jay doesn't know. And he doesn't actually really try. He's just like, I don't know. I don't know why that's on the phone records. I don't know. And that's hard. But when you think about it, how much of your time could you account for is the really intriguing part of this, because Sarah goes back and forth on what she thinks about it too in podcast, and she starts the podcast even with like, could you account for your whereabouts that long ago? Could you remember what you did and who you talked to and where you went and why certain things happened? It's a fair point that this is going to be hard in all of those respects, just because of the nature of it, because of the nature of the evidence being fairly circumstantial, where it's not definitive, I guess. There's a lot, but there's nothing definitive placing different things. So that part's hard. And a lot of it is based on the testimony of one person. And that's just not a great foundation. But the other really interesting part that I wanted to hit on was what's called the Asia letter. So while in prison, Adnan Syed got a letter from a friend from high school that said, why are you not telling them that we talked that day? And why, why are you not saying that? Because we talked, like, I remember seeing you in the library after school at about this time. And if that's the case, then he would have been talking to her through when the official time of death is set at. So he couldn't have been there. He couldn't have done it. And it couldn't have been the way Jay said it happened. It just doesn't fit. But if he wasn't talking with her, then he could, right? Like, there's more wiggle room if he wasn't actually talking with her. And that letter kind of blows everything up, because it's like, okay, now there's this question of, was Adnan in the library after school that day or not? And it's interesting because even the girl that wrote the letter has a moment of like, I can't tell you absolutely everything, but I'm pretty sure it was that day that I talked with him in the library. And there's kind of this push from Sarah of like, could it have been a different day that you're remembering though? And it wasn't that day, but you did have a day, maybe that same week, that you talked to him in the library after school. But it wasn't that day. And you kind of have to concede, okay, sure, maybe it could have not been that day. But the way she was describing the weather was that day. And unfortunately, when she goes to look into, okay, is the library keep any records of, you know, students checking in, checking out, logging onto computers, anything like that, because there was some talk of him using a computer in the library for schoolwork or something. And they don't. They certainly wouldn't be keeping it this far after. And they didn't have security cameras or anything to verify it and to actually officially determine whether or not he was in the library after school. But it's just interesting looking at all of the evidence and seeing like there's really question on both sides. Like, let me know what you guys think. If you kind of are undecided, if you have an opinion one way or the other, I would be really intrigued to hear your take on this, because I have now listened through the podcast, which I feel like has been the best source about this, because you talk to the actual, like you don't personally talk to, you hear conversations and these hard questions asked of the people actually involved in the case, right? Adnan's told, look, you need to answer this. Like, what, can you explain this? Because that's weird. And it's just interesting to contrast that with the facts of the case and look at, okay, if I was a juror, right? Like, if I was sitting on the jury for this case, do I feel like I have enough? Because evidence-wise, the way our court system works is innocent until proven guilty and beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So as a jury, you are not supposed to convict somebody unless you have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So if there's any doubt, you really aren't supposed to, right? You're not supposed to have there be a ton of space for this potentially not being accurate and the person being innocent. It's a human system, and that makes it interesting. But as I've listened to the podcast at least 2 or 3 times now, it's a really interesting story to listen through multiple times because you catch little things throughout it. But it's one where I would be very confused sitting on the jury. I think if I was a juror in this case, I would be sitting there like, I have no idea, because that's just, gosh, the nature of what they have, what they're presenting to you is like really confusing. And there's certain things that I think the biggest part was just missing context, like the phone records. I feel like there was so much reliability put on the phone records, and especially in 1999, that is just not reality. Um, but except for that one weird phone call does give you pause, like that kind of breaks through what would be considered, oh, the phone records could be, you know, not as reliable, because it's not gonna just throw a phone call in there that didn't happen or something. It could be the location is wrong, but the timing and the phone number aren't gonna be. So either way, that's a weird phone call, whether or not it pinged somewhere sketchy, right? It's just so interesting. And then to compare, so you can hear the testimony given by Jay in the interviews with the police all 3 times. He talks to them 3 different times. And each time, his story changes just a little bit. Like it goes from, I'm at a strip mall, come get me, to I'm at Best Buy. Okay. Those are different. He also says that he was calling from a payphone when that Best Buy didn't have a payphone. And you can look at on the Serial website. I feel like Serial website has been better for this case than Wikipedia, which is good. It's a good website, but so you can see in the plans, the architectural drawing of that Best Buy, that there wasn't a phone booth, right? So how did that happen? And Jay had Adnan's phone. It's just, those little things make you go crazy trying to fit them all into one piece where they actually all work and come to some sort of conclusion about things. It's a very interesting case in a lot of ways to look at how we determine things, all of that. So I thought this was a really fun case to talk about just because of all of the dynamics in it. I would love to hear your thoughts on this and kind of your take of this evidence. There's so much deeper information there if you look at it that makes this even more a rabbit hole to go down. But I think when you're talking about putting someone in prison for life, there are so many cases that got dropped and people released from prison once DNA testing was a thing, because if they had just tested the DNA, all of the case falls apart. And while I don't think this is one that's possible to happen, because they did some DNA testing on an item found by the body, it wasn't even, I don't think there was any testing, from what I know, there wasn't any testing done on anything from her. But it's so interesting. There may be DNA testing that could be done from stuff on her, though. From DNA they found on her now I'm questioning myself. There may be DNA that still needs to be tested. Now that I'm, like, remembering. Gosh, there's so much to this case. It's overwhelming to look at all of the information and try to understand what happened. Max heard something. Okay. So, there's also a really interesting part of the very last episode notes. So, like, the details under the very last episode where it talks about there's a few pieces of evidence that we haven't been able to track down in the whole 15 months that they investigated this. It says the first is Adnan's Hotmail account. Let me let the clock go. It's gonna go for a minute because it's 11:15. Okay, so the first is his Hotmail account, which they do talk about being something that could potentially corroborate Asia's letter and story of, like, talking to him, because it says, Adnan says that he went to the public library after school on January 13th to check his email. And that's when Asia says they had a conversation. So if they could get into that and see if he was checking his email between those times, that would help corroborate one side of the story. And then Hayes' computer. The next thing that mysteriously vanished into the ether was Hayes' computer. Hay wrote in her diary that she had copied parts of the diary into her computer. And at some point in 1999, when this was still a missing persons case instead of a homicide, the police department took the computer to see if it could provide any clues. And then interview notes. The detectives didn't tape every interview they conducted, but they did take notes. Most of these notes came with an information sheet on the interviewee, most standard stuff. And then both the notes and the info sheet were usually included in the case file. Though, as we've mentioned, there are no notes for 3 untaped hours before they started recording Jay's second interview. So there's 3 whole hours of interviewing Jay before they turn the recorder on and actually record the interview they have on file for his second interview. Which is very interesting. And then there's some people they wish they had gotten to talk to. The phone records is a part of it. So we have Adnan's cell phone records memorized by now, but they only tell part of a murky story. For example, we can't see who was calling his phone. Those calls just say incoming. So we can only see what numbers were dialed from his phone. So that's where that whole weird phone call outgoing to that friend that Jay doesn't know gets weird, because it's like, why would he call that number? And then Adnan's only response is, I don't know, it must have been a butt dial. It must have just accidentally called. And yeah. So they also have some updates to the case, which are very interesting. So the first update is from February 7th, 2015. So it's now been a while. But it says the Court of Special Appeals will hear arguments in the Adnan Syed case. The Maryland Court of Special Appeals has agreed to hear arguments about why Adnan should either get a new trial or have some other remedy. And the argument that Adnan is using is incompetent counsel. So his initial trial lawyer, he's saying, did not do a good enough job. And that's why the case went the way it did. And basically saying, with a better lawyer, a better case could have been made, and I want another chance. So you can kind of file that if you feel like you didn't get good counsel. And try to get a new trial. So I believe they have scheduled a new trial. I don't know if they've, well, now nothing's scheduled, but let me see, because I think after that I saw some kind of timeline given almost. Okay, so an update from November 25th. Okay, so it just said the Supreme Court has declined to hear Adnan's appeal of the case. Yeah, it says Syed's case attracted an international following. This is from NPR.org. Syed's case attracted an international following when it was featured in the 12-part podcast in 2014. His case seemed to have a breakthrough in 2016 when a Maryland court ordered a new trial, citing an alibi witness that was never explored. That's Asia, the Asia letter. The Maryland Court of Special Appeals agreed with the lower court, but state prosecutors continued to fight it, and in March, the state's highest court, the Court of Appeals, determined in a 4-3 decision that Syed does not deserve a new trial, reversing his legal victory and keeping Syed locked up. That ruling essentially was affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court when they brought it up to their saying no. So there's an update to that. If you had heard he may get a new trial, that has now been updated and they said no. So I don't know if there's really a way for me to end this definitively. There's not. I just would love to hear your thoughts. There's so much in this case that is so interesting to me. There's so much about it that is just kind of mind-blowing and mind-boggling, like trying to track with it. And I would love to hear your thoughts, whether you think he's innocent or guilty, if you have one way or the other, what you think about some of the specific evidence and kind of how weird some of it is. I just find it so interesting in a lot of ways as like a case study for a murder trial. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear other cases you would like to talk about. I would love to continue doing more of these because this is super fun. And I hope you enjoyed it. Also, if there's a specific time of day that's better for you guys for a live stream, let me know. Because I know I was later in the afternoon last time, and I'm a little earlier this time. So let me know. Let me know which one is better for you to be able to hop on. So, okay. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts. All of the links are in the chat, so hopefully you were able to snag those. I did say most of them verbally, and you could Google it after too. But if not, you can comment after we're done if those links disappear. Let me know, and I can try to put them back in if you're not able to see them. Because I feel like that's something that's changed. It used to be the live comments on YouTube went away after. And I feel like that maybe has changed. But let me know. And I can put the links back if you want. Okay. This was a lot of heavy information. A lot of detailed information looking at things. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you stay tuned for the week 8 quarantine update and getting the baby chicks. That will be going live tomorrow. I've been trying to upload every other day at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And that seems just like a really good pattern. So I have had my moments of doing more frequently, but I've tried to at the least do every other day. Yeah. So keep an eye out for videos. Generally, it's every other day. And yeah. Okay. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And let me know your thoughts. And I will talk to you guys later. Thanks for hanging out and talking with me. Hannah, thank you so much for your comments and giving your insight. That was very interesting and cool to hear. Yeah. Okay. I will talk to you guys later.